Welcome to the Studio Business Accelerator podcast. I'm Evan Wedsworth.
And I'm Mago Lauritsen.
We're here today to talk about the money problem. Mago, would you mind telling us what is the money problem and how often does it show up?
So most studio owners that are doing instructional arts classes of some kinds did not choose to be in this business because they sat down and looked at weighed out their rational options of what type of business that they thought would be kind of the most profitable. Instead, we made a passionate decision. Hey, I could do this and run this as a business and make a few bucks at this. That's an idea that a guy named Michael Gerber popularized back with it many, many years ago in a book called The E-Myth. He referred to it as the entrepreneurial seizure, right? And people just would, wake up one day and say, hey, I like making pies. I could make pies for a living. And then I would do what I love every day, right? And so there are a couple of problems inherent in our industry, with our industry, meaning the instructional studio business industry, that we need to be aware of. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't run this kind of business, but it does put us at a little bit of a disadvantage, okay? And basically the money problem states that as you scale your business in this industry, as you grow your business, one, the business itself always becomes more expensive to run. And two, each additional student that you add to your studio becomes less and less profitable your business. One, the business itself always becomes more expensive to run. And two, each additional student that you add to your studio becomes less and less profitable as a percentage as you grow. Okay. And so there's this kind of, everybody's on this treadmill as a result of this money problem where they think, oh, if I just get this many more students, then I'm going to make this much more money. But of course, what happens is as your studio grows, you need to hire more people to help you out with it. You need to hire instructors. You need to hire admin staff. You need to buy more paper towels. It just simply gets more expensive. You're eventually going to get to a point where you're going to need to invest in better real estate and larger or an additional location as you grow. And that can set you back a whole heck of a lot of money, right? And make this less profitable. And so as you grow, it becomes less profitable on an individual new student basis but there's over time, but there's some sort of nuances to our own industry that make it very, very hard for us to outrun that problem. And part of that, we see it all the time, and it's of course heartbreaking where people have been in business for 30, 40 years and they have 600 students and there's still nobody's making any money out of this. And so we've just kind of affectionately referred to that issue as what we call the money problem.
You recently told me a story of a person you talked to who had been in business for about 20 or 21 years, and had paid herself a total of $2,000 over that 20 years.
Yeah, there were 2 months over those 20 years where she had paid herself $1,000 each of those months, and had been in business for 21 years, had 2 children during that time. So her children grew up not knowing what it was like to not have their mother be a studio owner, and having to dedicate a whole heck of a lot of time to that thing. And that's not an uncommon conversation for us to have. Yeah.
As we've said, through the consulting arm of the business, you're talking to hundreds of studios. How many of them are stuck in this ongoing cycle of trying to outrun the costs and not being able to have any real financial stability?
Yeah, this is a great example of something that everybody sort of recognizes as is happening, but A, doesn't anticipate when they first get into the business, and B, isn't doing anything about it, right? And so, and I don't want it to sound like the norm in this industry is that that most studios are paying themselves, $2,000 every 20 years. That's not what I'm saying. There's plenty of people that are making some money off of this and that are paying themselves an arguably fair wage. But I would say that a majority of the people that we're talking, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are frustrated because they've recognized how much work they've put into this over the years and are concerned that the return is not, especially as you get a little bit older, you start worrying about those things. You start realizing that, you're not going to live forever, that you start worrying about those things a little bit more. And I would say that it's a majority of the people that are not doing an effective job of outrunning the money problem. Now, I want to clarify too that it's not their fault. They haven't been taught. They're following old models, right? They're following these models of how to run an instructional studio that kind of were developed in the 60s and 70s, and still kind of clinging on to that because that's what they learned from, and that's what their teachers learned from. And so we've got like 3 or 4 generations now of studio owner that has learned this model that is not effective in today's economy.
It's a little bit crude to try to reduce someone's contribution and worth to money and even an hourly wage. But of course, the reality is that the money is always going to be part of it, and it's not something you can get away from. And if you were to sit down to yourself as an owner and calculate what your hourly wage is over your lifetime, it would be something that if you applied for a job at a corporation and they told you, okay, over the next 20 years, you're going to put in 50 to 60 hours a week, and your hourly wage is going to come out to $4 an hour. How does that sound?
Yeah.
No one would sign up for that. Everyone would walk away.
You got to be, well, you got to be really, really excited. That's the momentum that everybody has that throws themselves into this. And we could spend an entire episode talking about what I'm about to say here, but we won't. I just want to make a couple of other points. One is that what most people in this industry, frankly, most entrepreneurs and people running little startups and things have done is they've created for themselves a job. They have not created for themselves a business. So that's one thing. And then another thing, and I think you touched on this, that, once again, we could spend an entire episode, maybe we should, talking about just this subject, but we believe that as you're hiring staff and training staff and bringing people on, especially if you want the best people, that it's immoral to ask people to trade the hours of their lives for dollars. There better be something else there, right? Like there better be some other vision that they're behind, and then the money is also a nice thing. Like what if the world just worked that way instead? And so we believe that pushing that idea, and once again, that's about all I'm going to say about that here, but that's an important thing to do. But am I willing to apply that to myself? Nice thing. Like what if the world just worked that way instead? And so we believe that pushing that idea, and once again, that's about all I'm going to say about that here, but that's an important thing to do. But am I willing to apply that to myself, right? Am I willing to say it's also immoral for me to just trade the hours of my life for dollars? So I think that's a great question that you ask about, we're not going to just reduce this to how much money did you make last month. You contributed to the quality of somebody's life, right? Like this person might end up being, have this, much more successful, much higher quality of life, even after they're done training with you, as a result of the direct contact that they had with you and with your program. And so is there that value there as well? Well, of course there is. Of course there is. And anybody who's, listened to us talk or worked with us directly knows that that is a big focus of what we believe is important that people, focus on, that they implement in their businesses. But had the influence that the tool of money gives you to leverage as well. What if you also had that? Could you go out and influence more people? Could you have more students? Could you build additional locations? Could you train and hire more staff that can then implement your vision and carry this idea forward and have a bigger impact on everybody? And so I think that's the direction that I'd like to kind of talk about with money today. It's like, yeah, does it mean that my life is a failure if I ran a studio for 20 years and only paid myself, a couple $1,000s over those 20 years? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's not how we're going to demonstrate that value. But what if you could do more? What if you could have both of those? And, I think a lot of us too, and me in particular, I didn't come from a family that was like financially, I think by nature of living in the United States, personally, I think that I have, of course, some advantages just by having been born in the right place. But my family is not, that I was grown up in was, my dad was an army man and my mom led the church choir. We were just kind of in that that's the milieu that I grew up in. And I think that most studio owners that I talked to did come up that way. They ended up with this, and I still have this very sort of blue collar approach to what makes work valuable. Something about it being hard is what makes it valuable, and those kind of things. And I think there's still some value. I honor that, and I'm grateful for that. I have changed my attitude towards a lot of those things because I've recognized that I was also not intentionally, but raised unintentionally with a little bit of head trash about money, and believing that, I think media does a good job of demonstrating that the people who have the money must have. And so I think getting over that head trash is a piece of this as well.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about some adjacent stuff in our last episode, and why it is that we think that things like dance classes and martial arts classes are valuable, and how the community doesn't necessarily see it that way. And I think this is a part of it, that we're both reluctant to talk about the money, and also reluctant to admit to ourselves that if we had the right tools to outrun the money problem, we could have a bigger impact. And it feels, like I said, it feels a little bit crude to say, well, if only I had more money, I could do better. As someone who's teaching classes or running a studio, I don't think that's that's not spiritually fulfilling to tell yourself, in a way, because again, it does seem to be studio. I don't think that's that's not spiritually fulfilling to tell yourself, in a way, because again, it does seem to be almost like it's running against the grain of what the arts is all about. You want to say, if only I had a more reliable staff, or if only I had 3 copies of myself to be teaching classes, then I could run a better program, right? Then, but I think that there is a point to start to recognize that the money does become a tool that then you can use to promote exactly what you've been trying to promote all of these years. And so it's not necessarily this crude measure of what you're worth or what your program is worth, but if you can see it as something you can leverage to then make a larger impact, that will help you in the long run.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I think that was a great insight, by the way. There's a couple of things there that as I listened to you talk about that I kind of want to spend a moment unpacking. First of all, you're right, crude to say that the value of what you're contributing to your community is defined by how much money you make. But it is one way of valuing what you do. It just shouldn't be the only way of what it is that you're valuing. Okay. And what money is, right? Money is not real. And in our country, like, it doesn't even represent anything. You can't even go trade it in for gold or silver anymore. Like, that's not even a thing. And so all money is this sort of social contract that we all have with each other that we just happen to believe in. And if people stopped believing it, then the value drops, right? Like, if there's enough people that believe in it, it's going to work, and if there's not, it ain't, right? And so that's what money is, and money is one measure. It is not the only measure of the amount of value that you can bring to the world. You can arguably say that even people who do this with even for in less moral ways are in some way providing some value, and that's the reason that some of the money ends up in their pockets and not somebody else's. So I think it's important to confront that idea. It's important to admit that that's the way that money works, and it is one measure of those things. And if we can do that, then we can. I think, like, the issue you were talking about is in part a result of people not valuing themselves as much as I think that they should, especially in this industry. And we've been taught that sort of secondhand growing up in a society that looks at people like, doctors and attorneys and says those people are worth this amount of money per year or whatever, and somehow doesn't do that in our industry, in the arts world, in the instructional world. And why is that, But if you look at it, like, you think about, how much time did you invest in your personal life in mastering the things that you've gotten really good at, that you're probably teaching other people? Like, how long did you spend developing that? Well, with that much time, if you had spent it, going in a different direction, you could both be a rocket scientist and also a brain surgeon in that amount of time. You could be both of those things. And then both of those things, the society that at least that I live in, that I grew up in, is like, hey, those things are worth a lot, right? And so they recognize that. But we somehow don't, and we somehow miss out on that. Like, we spent a lot of time, developing these things. Maybe I am worth more, and maybe part of that, maybe one way to measure that is with the amount of money that I make, right? Or that I'm willing to tell myself that I am worth. Not everybody struggles with that, but a lot of people kind of struggle with that mindset. Now, I think the second part of your question, you may have to re-clarify here, but was talking a little bit about like the results of the money problem, right? Like, what is it that like, how, so what? So this is a problem. So what? Well, first of all, I think one problem is that we maintain this idea that people in our industry are not worth something more. And then once again, we project that on our community, and then our community goes, yeah, these people aren't worth more as well. And so is my community magically going to change and suddenly decide that, what I'm doing or what I'm teaching is worth more? Probably not. So therefore, I ought to take some responsibility personally to try and move that mountain if I can. Okay. And I'm not going to imply that it's easy. We'll talk about that in other episodes and how we do that. But I think that's one of the things, I think that, repeat your question for me, and that'll give me another jumping off point here.
Yeah. Well, talking about how if you're inside the money problem, a lot of your life is going to be dictated. A lot of your life and a lot of what you're able to do is going to be dictated by that. You're missing this resource. And so things like, can I afford to hire more staff, or can I afford to buy more paper towels? Can I afford to take a week off to go to a seminar or to do ongoing education, something like that? It's going to be really difficult to do those kinds of things. And so I think day-to-day minutia of what running the business is and running the studio is. You said when you began, you and your wife were running everything, and you had to do things like, okay, I got to teach class real quick, and then I got to talk to this person about how their tuition is late, and then I got to go restock the bathroom, and then I got to mop the floors, and then I get to go home. And then when I get home, I got to work on what kind of advertising might I like to do, and if you can outrun these kinds of things, you're able to pay other people to take over that kind of stuff and take those responsibilities. People that you trust and people that you want to be around who both reflect and enhance your own values, your own characteristics. And then that hopefully then frees you up to look at some other stuff. And so maybe we can talk about, what does life look like outside the money problem? As we said, it takes you, perhaps 5. So maybe we can talk about, what does life look like outside the money problem? As we said, it takes you, perhaps 5 hours each week to manage the studios and manages the businesses. And so presumably you spend the rest of the hours doing some other stuff. What does that look like?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. I think that a couple of things. First of all, I believe you're right. I believe when you're stuck in the money problem, it's hard to break your vision out of that, right? It's hard to get out of that. But once you kind of figure some of these things out that we'll talk about a little bit today, and when we get to the how do you actually do this part, the other side, like, man, not wanting to sound cliche, like, freedom is part of the word that I think that I would use. And I love that, like, that we should have a debate sometime about that too, about what does it mean to be free. But really what happens is it opens up opportunity. And that is not always a good thing. Or I should say it's not always that I believe is important to impose on the world. And for the years that I've been doing this kind of the wrong way, I haven't been able to do a good job of flexing that muscle. And then so we can use that as an excuse, right? We can say, oh, well, my community doesn't, respect the arts, or, hey, everybody in the summertime here goes to summer camp, or, goes to stay with dad and comes back with mom, and so I can't be profitable over the summertime. And like we have all of these like convenient excuses for why I'm not able to implement the vision that I have. And once you outrun the money problem, those excuses go away. And then what you're left with is an opportunity to more effectively implement your vision and to have a bigger impact on your own community. But that's not as easy as it sounds, because now you actually have to, practice that. You have to implement that. Just to give it that was a very heady way of saying that. Let me give you kind of a specific example. At our studios, leadership training and character development is a very big thing. We pay attention to that, and we don't just offer lip service to it. We don't just say, hey, like everybody out there, says we're going to teach you how to set goals and be disciplined and all those kind of things. And we think that's true. We think that many people are implementing that very well. We want to actually measure that. We want to actually do better at that over time, right? And so we've developed an actual curriculum that we use in our studios and all of our programs that, talks about that. And there's a certain percentage of each class each month and those kind of things that all of our instructors are trained to do, to follow, and to have these little activities and lessons and things, both with the kids classes and the adult classes, that will hopefully have an influence on people over time, right? Okay, so we have this leadership training program that we've developed and many of our consulting clients decide to implement that as well. Well, my wife and I were talking about, what's the next thing for the studio, and that's great and that's cool. But then my wife just a couple weeks ago was like, I really think we could be doing a better job of training our staff on this leadership program and making them more effective instructors and making them more responsible for measuring the result of that in the students themselves. And so we've gone to work with how we actually run our staff meetings now, and made some changes to our staff meetings so that now our staff is much more capable, just in the last 2 months, of actually implementing that vision, right? So I'm not concerned at all about enrolling more students and growing my programs. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm not concerned at all. Of course, I'm always trying to build that, and I'm trying to grow that. But there's other things now that I get to work on that are very, very fun things, and they are very, very, not just fun. That's the wrong word. They're very rewarding things for us to look at, And we're interviewing as we're going through this process, and we're trying to decide how do we measure these results. We're interviewing students and we're interviewing parents, and we're talking to them and asking for their feedback so that we can kind of work on that visionary piece. But that's much more rewarding than the way that we used to run our studios decades ago, where we were not able to free ourselves up to work on these other things, right? So that's a big piece of it, I think, as well.
Yeah, imagine who you would be and what thoughts you would have in your head every day if you had been stuck with the same problems for the last 20 or 30 years, and what kinds of things that you have discovered about yourself and the people around you as a result that you do get to tackle these other problems. I think a rough way to live life is to always be solving the single day. I for a long time, I worked in bike shops, and it's a customer service business, service industry, and that comes with its own inherent flaws and difficulties. But what I found was that even though I really liked the place that I worked, I really liked everyone I worked with, I think that place reflected a lot of the same values that we talk about here, where it genuinely cared about its impact on the community and how can it help people ride bikes and have fun and meet new people, that kind of thing. Ultimately, the reason that I wanted to get out of that is just after 5 or 6 years realizing, I'm continually solving the exact same problem every day. And I've gotten to the point now where I have these rote solutions. I don't even have to think about it. My brain never engages. My brain is just this constant autopilot. And when somebody says these rote solutions, I don't even have to think about it. My brain never engages. My brain is just this constant autopilot. And when somebody says this, they say A, I know that I have B ready to go. And I just implement that and I go for it. And I think it's a difficult way to live. And if you can do something like get outside of the money problem, exactly what you said. It gives you opportunities which come with difficult choices and difficult challenges. But then imagine, that you hadn't had those, and what would be happening inside your head, if that were the case.
That is a great point. I think a way that I often say that, like when I'm talking to my own clients that I'm working with in the consulting company, the way that we say that is, look, the only real guarantee that I can get you is that we will cause you new problems. Right. But that they're better problems. They are. Like, would you rather be like trying to figure out how to pay the lease your new location, or would you rather be figuring out how to implement more effectively your higher level messaging, because you're not stuck, like you said, in that daily minutia of those problems that you had hopefully years and years ago. And I absolutely agree with that. I make the joke a lot of times that I have this entrepreneurial ADHD, right? But that's part of how I feed that, right? Is that I'm not, like, the business that I am running today is not the same as the business that I was running 2 years ago or even 1 year ago. And the business that I'm running today, the problems that I'm solving today are not the same problems that I was working on a year ago. And if you are in that position where you're trying to keep solving the same problems, how do I enroll more students? How do I grow my program? How do I make more money over the summer? Like, you're doing something wrong, right? Like, it's broken. You're doing something wrong. You should be constantly working as the founder of the business. You should be engaging in new problems.
Yeah, I've certainly seen among friends of mine. Yeah, I've certainly seen among friends of mine that I grew up with in the capoeira program and in the dance studio, how especially as teenagers, the conception of yourself is dictated so much by school and what scholastic achievement means. And I think that I can see there's a line between some people where some people really internalize that as, I didn't do well in school, so I'm not smart, or I'm not capable, or I'm not bold, I'm not good at making decisions. And then other people who got that same message in school, had trouble in school, but through this community have now realized, actually, I'm going to open up my own studio. And then as they've learned how to do that, have come to discover things about themselves and really left those ideas behind, stopped telling themselves, I'm not smart, or I'm not capable. Or a great thing about having new problems is that as you solve them, you build some momentum for yourself. And so pretty soon it's hard to find a problem that makes you feel despair, makes you feel that you're stuck and it can't be solved.
Yeah,
or maybe
I would say rarely does a problem come along where, one of my mantras in life is that ideas is never the problem, right? For me, and very rarely does a problem come across my table where I'm like, man, this is not a solvable problem. Very rarely does that happen. I'm sure those kinds of problems exist, right? Like, I'm confident they do. Very rarely does that come along. Every once in a while, a problem comes along and I go, oh yeah, this one isn't worth solving. That happens quite a bit. But, part of the other side, what the grass is always greener point that we're trying to make here too, is that I get to choose which problems are the lowest hanging fruit. I get to make that decision, and it's very exciting to go, constantly working on something new that I do believe that I can solve, and then see the result of that, and then move on again and take that next step again. And I think I don't think this is where you were going with this, but the idea that some of our students have gone on and run their own programs and open their own studios and those kind of things, there's a lot of studio owners out there that are afraid of that. That are afraid that there's going to be one of their advanced teachers or something is going to take a bunch of their students and move down the street and open their competition. And many of them had that experience. And so I think it's a good fear to have, right? But you think about being in that position, or being in the position where we're in, where like, hey man, if somebody wants to open another studio, we're in a position where we can help them do that. And we would love to be working on that with you as opposed to working against you on that, and then assisting them in that and making that actually work. Which of those places do you want to be? If you're not able to outrun the money problem, you're going to be in one place. And if you're able to outrun the money problem, you can genuinely help these people to go pursue their dreams. Most of your students and teachers aren't going to want to do that, but those that do, like, which of those positions would you rather be in? I know where I'd rather be.
Yeah. I know where I would rather be also. Let's then talk about how how you've come to outrun the money problem and some things that you've picked up. You and I have talked a lot about the book Good to Great, and I know that you had a little paradigm here that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, you bet. So a lot of these lessons were, we figured out a bunch of this stuff from the beginning. When we first launched our studios, we were more successful than most studio owners were when they first launched them. At least when we moved to Colorado, where we are now, we had spent a year kind of studying business and marketing and some of these other things and had an idea of what we wanted to do. We were very naive, which I think worked in our favor. If we knew what we were getting ourselves into, we implemented the same way. And so I think that worked in our favor. But then 2008 eventually hit. And, I remember we would go into the studio and pretty much every night somebody was coming in and saying, hey, we got to withdraw Sally from class because dad lost his job or mom lost her job or, whatever happened. And we're going to take a break for a while. Like that was just happening at a higher rate than it did in the past. And I live in a city, right? I live in a city where we've got like 5 military bases and a couple of universities, right? So we have a very transient population anyway. There's people constantly moving in and out of the area. And then 2008 hit and we were like, oh man, what are we going to do? And we had fortunately implemented some of these things beforehand and kind of knew what we were doing at the time. But what that really drove home was that there's a lot of value in working with fewer students at a higher level rather than trying to get as many people as you possibly can into a program where they're paying, $54 a month and a $35 yearly registration fee. More sincerely, after 2008, is there a way for us to work with fewer people at a higher level individually so that we can create, it's just easier to manage that kind of a thing and it's more profitable from the very beginning. So that was a piece of it. And then this part that you're talking about with Jim Collins's stuff that I think we've really taken to heart is this. He's got this kind of like this Venn diagram, right? And we've been talking a lot about value already and you valuing yourselves and having your community value you. And it's like, okay, great, cool. That's a fantastic idea. How do we do that? Well, here's the jumping off point. I think that what he explains very well is that you really need 3 things. One of those things is you need to have some kind of vision, higher level vision for what you're doing that you are genuinely passionate about. And in your bike example, your bike shop example is a great one, right? You need to have some kind of vision, higher level vision for what you're doing that you are genuinely passionate about. And in your bike example, your bike shop example is a great one, right? They're building community and they're trying to help people to develop friendships and solve these social problems and things. And they're a bike shop. They don't sell bikes. You know what I'm saying? Like they've kind of figured that out. And so we have to figure that out for the studios. What is it that you can be passionate? For me, it's leadership training. Like I love to watch my staff members. I have staff members all the time come to me and talk to me about, the skills that they're developing and learning because we require them to teach them to the students, And so for us, that higher level messaging piece, that piece that I'm passionate about is that leadership training piece. It may not be the same for everybody who's listening to this thing. Okay, but there needs to be that piece first of all. And if you're missing that piece, you get burned out and you give up. And that's a big piece of the burnout. The other piece of that kind of Venn diagram, you need to be passionate about it. The second piece is that it needs to be something that you're genuinely good at. Okay, and if in the way Jim Collins says it, he says you need to be the best in the world at it. Well, you need to be the best in your immediate area at it. Okay, so that like in the area that you have influence, you do need to be the best at that thing. And so it probably should be something different than what everybody else in your area is trying to do, right? That's probably an argument we can make. But it needs to be something that you are really good at. Let's not go try and sell something to people that you're not really good at or that you're not passionate about. And then the third piece of this Venn diagram is that we need to have something that other people will value if they understand it. People are willing to pay money for this thing if they understand that you have this thing. So we're solving a genuine problem that people have. Some of the best entrepreneurs that I'm involved in the startup community in my city, and these things, if they understand that you have this thing. So we're solving a genuine problem that people have. Some of the best entrepreneurs that I'm involved in the startup community in my city, and these folks that I'm working with that are developing software and tech and all this kind of stuff, And the best entrepreneurs and the best ideas were developed because they listened to what people complained about. They sat back and they listened to what people complaining about, and they're like, hey, there's a problem here. Let's go solve that problem. That's where the best ideas come from. So if we can get those three circles to overlap, right? Something you're passionate about, something that you can genuinely be good at delivering, preferably the best in your world at, and third, that people will actually pay for. Right where all of those three things overlap is where the magic happens. And so people will tell me all the time, when we talk to them about our tuition rates and how much we're charging and how much people are paying, right at the fundamentals level, right? These are beginner students coming in. We talk about those rates. Most people are incredulous. And they say, oh, well, Mago, you don't understand Magic City or something, which of course is not true. And we've implemented these systems. We've helped other clients implement these systems everywhere. But usually when we dig a little deeper, something's missing, right? There's one of those three pieces of that diagram that are missing. And if we can get all of those three pieces together, and then we can get that idea in your community's mind, in your brain, before you make an offer to them, then you're in a position where you can charge significantly higher tuition rates. You can get people to commit to longer terms of training. You can get people to take multiple classes, per week, and commit to make much, much higher commitments with you. And that ultimately is the secret, right? It's like what most studios are doing is they have some kind of this like magic online enrollment widget that they put on their website because they feel icky about sales or whatever, or they're not willing to spend the time talking to people and making sure that they understand the value of their program and that they're enrolling in the right thing. And then they're just saying, hey, if you want to enroll, just go to my website and do this thing, right? As opposed to, and I guess the result of that is that then everybody's kind of running the Walmart of dance studios because everybody's sort of doing the same thing. And then you do have to compete on price because people who are beginners can't distinguish you from everybody else in town. And so they're looking for the cheapest option, the one that's closer to their house, as opposed to the one that will actually solve their problem. And I think that, so first piece, right, is we need to value what we're doing. We need to demonstrate that value to people, and then we need to commit them to higher, make higher financial commitments and time commitments to our programs. We need to learn how to do that. And that solves a big piece of the money problem, right? Can we work with fewer people at a higher level? And let's do that first, and then let's scale it, and then let's go enroll a whole bunch of students. But let's figure that piece out first. I talk to studios all the time that have like made the mistake of filling their locations with people who are making low commitments to their studio. And then how do we solve that problem? Well, that's a tough one because we want to fill your studio with people that are highly committed, not low commitment students, right? Working with fewer people at a higher level is a big piece of that.
Something else that gives you is not only does it help you outrun the money problem, but it builds some resiliency into your studio. You talked about the lessons you learned from 2008, and not everyone's been in business since 2008, but I know that everyone just went through COVID and plenty of studios had to shut down, plenty of them had to scale back. How did things go for you in Colorado? And what about the clients that you're working with? How did their studios survive the last year?
Most of them that took our advice did really, really well. Qualify for a lot of the government assistance because our studio grew. I actually opened another location the October before COVID hit. So I had a brand new location. We'd opened in October of 2019, and in March of 2020, COVID shut everybody down. And those studios, like the students that were the most susceptible to COVID, that you were the most susceptible of losing, were the very young students for the most part, and the new students. And so that studio was built up, like we didn't have advanced students over at that location, right? Because they just hadn't been around long enough. And so it was very, very susceptible to that. But we still made, we increased the net income of all of the studios over the year that COVID had us completely shut down. And we also raised our tuition rates twice during the COVID shutdowns. And it's because we do not sell dance classes. That's not what I sell, right? Had us completely shut down. And we also raised our tuition rates twice during the COVID shutdowns. And it's because we do not sell dance classes. That's not what I sell, right? Like I sell something else. And if I have to deliver that temporarily over an online class, or if I have to deliver that in the park outside, or if I have to deliver that temporarily a different way, we are not just selling dance classes. We have something else, and people understand that. And if they understand that, they are willing to pay more for that. Okay. And keeping in mind that me raising my tuition 2 different times over COVID on a couple of programs, I'm already charging almost 3 times as much as my nearest competitors in town. Okay. And we were still able to do that. So if we had not gone through what we went through in 2008, and there's another lesson and a conversation here for another time, if we had not gone through what we went through in 2008, we would not have succeeded as well as we did in 2020. Now, am I glad there was a pandemic? No, of course not. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Stuff is going to happen. There are going to be bad things that happen to all of us. And if we are not prepared for those things, if we cannot be resilient, that's not what's going to happen. And I don't want this to turn into kind of a Mago pity party, but I mean, over the last few years for me personally, like it's been very difficult for us to be running these businesses. So if we didn't have, with my wife being diagnosed with her advanced cancer and a lot of other things that kind of we won't get into today, like all of those things happening, if we didn't have these systems set up the way that they were, it probably would have been the end of us. It wouldn't have even taken, COVID or 2008 or anything else. It would have just been life. Just Mago's life would have probably put this under. So I'm very grateful that we had this figured out before then.
Something that we'll talk more about in a later episode is this idea of being anti-fragile, coined by a guy named Nassim Taleb, who's written a few books, including one that's called Anti-Fragile. He defines stuff as something that's fragile, does worse with change, worse over time. Something that is resilient or stoic stays the same over time and with change. Something that's anti-fragile actually gets better with change and over time. And I think that if you're running a business or trying to run your life in a fragile way, you're hoping that things will continue and life won't give you those obstacles, because then you're going to face those difficulties. Like you said, if you didn't need a financial crisis to almost shut the studios down, but if you can get outside of the money problem, all of a sudden you put yourself in this anti-fragile place where now you have time to work on these things and to build these different pillars of the business, that as things like, sure, we'll talk about this also, but I know that there's lots of stuff that COVID taught us all that now we can use in the regular day-to-day running of the studio. Let's wrap up today talking about, the money problem exists. There's another problem that causes the money problem. You and I were talking about is the belief system. Maybe you don't mind spending a moment on that.
Yeah, I think, and this is in anticipation of some of the pushback of the resistance to the idea that people will pay significantly higher tuition rates, right, and make long-term commitments from the very beginning. And a lot of people just simply don't believe that that's true, but they're implementing things in a way that is counter to actually getting that result. Like we talked about earlier, running their businesses as if they're a commodity, not realizing that nobody can tell the difference between them and all of the other studios in town, or doing actually getting that result. Like we talked about earlier, running their businesses as if they're a commodity, not realizing that nobody can tell the difference between them and all of the other studios in town, or doing this kind of like, go to my website and automatically enroll in my stuff, and just then all I have to do is show up and teach class and magically everything will work. Well, of course that doesn't work. And the insidious thing about those kind of models is that they kind of work, right? There are a few people who will jump through all those hoops and will do that thing, and you don't have to do as much of a demonstration of value on the front end. You don't have to do all those things, and you're going to get some of them. And so it kind of feeds into this belief system that they're doing things the right way, and that if they raise their tuition, it's not going to work, right? So they're kind of, it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense that's kind of holding people back. But I started out where everybody else is. I started out, my closest competitor for me is 3 blocks away, and they have I think at least direct competitor for ballet, tap, jazz, quality students and putting on great shows and those kind of things. And you can go on their website and you can see that they're charging $54 a month and charging a $35 yearly registration fee. And we literally are charging at least, like I don't have a program at my studio that's less than $169 a month after a $249 down payment or a $299 down payment. And a 12-month commitment. Like that doesn't exist in my studio. If you want that, you have to go down the street and train with my competitor, and I'm okay with that, right? If you're looking to charge $5 or more than everybody else in town, is your program 1 cup of coffee more valuable than everybody else's program? Well, I hope not. I hope that you're more valuable than everybody else's program than that. If not, then when you opened your business, really all you did was you muddied the waters, and now you just made it harder for everybody to decide because you don't have a lot of additional value that you're adding. That's a problem we need to fix. But it's not like it's a problem we need to fix. But it's not like I started there, right? Like I started there with those low commitments and short-term commitments and no large down payments and all those other things. I started there, and then we figured out that if we will pay attention to the math and track the right statistics, not the vanity metrics that we're usually being fed, but if we'll track the right statistics, we can make very good decisions about where we should actually be positioned in the market. And that's something, and I'd be happy, we're not going to have time to go over that today on this presentation, but if somebody would like to have that conversation with us, I have a number of staff members that are trained to just talk to people about that. Like we'll run a couple of numbers from your business into some little formulas we have, and we'll be able to kick out some answers for, is there wiggle room in your tuition? And of course, most of the time the answer is yes, but we'll show you how to do that on an individual basis. But most studio owners simply don't believe that what we're doing is even possible to happen in their area. And that's the thing that's holding them back. Belief system. Stop telling yourself the story that you're not worth what you are worth. You could be both a rocket scientist and a brain surgeon in the amount of time it took you to be whatever it is that you are and whatever it is that you're doing. Stop telling yourself that story. You are absolutely worth more. And that belief system is, for my experience, is the biggest hurdle for most studios, right? The biggest hurdle for most studios. You know, Evan, there's actually one other thing that I wanted to talk about as well, and this is, you know, kind of a personal thing. Another problem that I think the money problem brings up, and that's sort of like, once again, this is the belief system is kind of exacerbated by this. A lot of studio owners are in relationships with people, a spouse, often a husband, who kind of sees what they're doing as an expensive hobby. And the relationship partner is not, it's not that they're not supportive, but it's almost like they're who kind of sees what they're doing as an expensive hobby. And the relationship partner is not, it's not that they're not supportive, but it's almost like their belief system is kind of dragging the studio owner down as well. And it creates, now I want everybody to know, I don't have any marriage counselors on my team, so we can't necessarily help you with those problems, right? But what I can tell you is that at the last live event that we did, we had a number of spouses and partners attend. And I think you were there and you talked to some of them, and a lot of them are like, oh man, I'm showing up to the next staff meeting. Like they understand that now that this is a real thing, you know. And imagine if the support system that you had was behind it, because they also had that vision and they also believed in it, how much of an impact that would have on your own belief system. But man, the belief system's a tough one. It's a really hard one.
Yeah. I think that's a good spot to end, the belief system. You can find us at studiobusinessaccelerator.com. You could check out $1 Million Dance Studio if you want to learn more about our programs. Like Mago said last time, we're pretty easy to find on the internet. We have a whole team here. There is a private Facebook group, the Studio Business Accelerator private Facebook group. If you want to search for that, you might be able to find it, and you can apply to join there, and we'll let us know that you heard us on the podcast, and we'll let you into that group. And we're having these discussions with other studio owners. Many of our clients are active in there as well, and our staff. So if you'd like to join that, that's another place to find us as well. All right. Join us next time, Studio Business Accelerator Podcast.